The topic of our conversation today is child development, and I'll try during our conversation today to see how we can link some basic theoretical concepts from developmental theory and overall thoughts of child development. How can we link it to our teaching in London Gates? And let's start from the beginning. And the beginning is the birth of the child, because believe it or not, before they came to study with us, these children, even the youngest ones, had at least 2 years of life experience. And it was actually quite a rich life experience, and lots of things happened to them. And they're not a blank page. They've had experiences with their parents, with their aunts. They had actually even experiences in the womb of their mother. All of this experience formed them as individuals, so whoever we get is absolutely unique. And one of the most important things for us is to actually get to know them before we start conveying any sort of information to them, playing with them, because actually in order to build a relationship, you need to know the other party. And you need to think about this other party, even if it's 2 years old, as a meaningful and important agent. Now, let's go very briefly through some really fundamentals of developmental theory, which is relevant for us, especially before the age of 2. And I think the first theory which we have to mention is the attachment theory. And the attachment theory is... anybody can help me? Who knows what attachment theory is? So attachment is absolutely it was coined by John Bowlby, who was saying that every mammal, so it's not just exclusive to humans, every mammal has an exclusive and unique bond to a caregiver. It's an evolutionary need because, when an infant is born, especially a human infant born, it's absolutely helpless. So it needs to evoke a certain response from the caregiver in order to for the caregiver to feed them, to protect them from danger, etc. And if we think about it, it's lying in the foundation of what human relationship a child will develop later in life, the quality of this early attachment relationship. So if we think about families who choose the so-called let them cry it out theory. Anybody heard about that? Briefly, the let them cry it out says when the infant is crying, let them cry. They will stop. And you know what? This theory works. They will stop. They will stop crying. They will also start developing a fundamental psychological trauma. Actually, a safe attachment behavior is a parent who is responsive to their child's needs, to their child's cries, to their child's expressions of emotion, etc. Because if the parent is not responding, then we create a complete block in their development, and we create a negative expectation from a relationship. And believe it or not, some of the children who come and study with us, they don't necessarily have the best early attachment experience. And we need to know that. And what we can do, and what's very important for us as teachers, is to figure out how this child responds to us and think that not necessarily they expect from the adult the best of intentions and the best of behaviors, and they don't necessarily come to us from the position to learn from us. And some of them will have the so-called secure attachment, which actually facilitates learning, and it's experimentally established how it influenced increased learning capacity, increased social development. But others might have a very different experience, and we need to be aware and responsive to how they respond to us. And if you see a child who is not willingly kind of engaging you as an adult and willing to learn, what we need to do, we need to create for them a different experience and a different expectation. Because what's important about attachment, it's not a death sentence. So, and it's been established many, many times over and over again that even if the child had the most horrible life experience and background, if somewhere, somehow, there was like an aunt, for example, who managed to give good care and who managed to create a different relationship, this child can change. This child can kind of develop a new and better trust in the world and have a better and more secure attachment to his friends later on when they develop. But essentially, when we think about attachment, think about it as a basic template of what do we expect from relationships with others, especially with others we depend on, and it can be a teacher, it can be a friend, it can be a loved one. And the quality of this is attachment. Now, the next thing I'd like to talk about is Elkanin's theory of primary activity. And it's important for us to remember that at every age, a child has a developmental task. It's their main job. This is what they do. So in the first year of life, it is actually forming an attachment to the caregiver. So it's establishing an intimate relationship with their mother, father, and the really, really close circle of individuals. This is their job. This is what this developmental stage is geared towards. Now, between the age of 1 and 3, and here we are already getting into the age group of our students, they start focusing on play. And from the age of 1, and actually even earlier, this play is just slightly different with infants, until the age of 6, at the very least, the main job of the child is to play. The quality of this play changes. So once before the kind of between the ages of 1 and 3, children are learning how to use objects and tools. Between the ages of 3 and 6, they also learn how to play with other children. And then around the age of 7, a gradual transition from playing to learning occurs. And actually, it's very important to remember that it's pretty much the same continuum, and we'll talk about it in a moment. And then around the age of 13, adolescence hits, and kind of hell breaks loose, and the entire focus shifts into forming relationships with a peer group. Now, what is especially relevant for us in London Gay is that what we are trying to do in all of our teaching and all of our relationships we build with students and in all programs we'll try to teach children in the way they will study, the best surprise, surprise. And how we do it, we are wrapping up our teaching in the way which is kind of the closest to this primary activity of this age group. So when we talk about preschoolers and children between the ages of 2 and 6, which we teach, we don't teach them. We play with them because this is their job and we're just helping them to do it in the best way possible. In the process, they learn great many things. But what they do is play. Let's quickly talk about different types of play. And it's very important to remember what kinds of play there are, because if you're trying to play with a child a game he developmentally unable to play, you're not achieving anything, and actually you might even be confusing the child, which is the last thing we're interested in doing. So play develops in 3 stages. First one is sensomotor play. Anybody knows what it is? What's a sensomotor play? A sensomotor play is basically it's enjoying the sense of things, the motorics. A child who would sit in his pram and will do that. There's no meaning for this play with like some object which is hanging above the tram, other than I'm touching it and it makes noise. And this is a fascinating play because a child figures out, oh, actually I can cause events in the external reality with my body. And also my body, when it moves, when like, a child just starts like jumping, I'm getting feedback. I'm getting feedback from my body. I'm doing something and it feels in a particular way. So this is sensomotor play. And this is a play which is characteristic for children from basically as young as they can move. The next level of play is symbolic play. Any ideas what that is? Essentially, symbolic play is you take a car, which is a toy car, and you play with it as if it was real. So the child is learning to use symbols, and that actually things can represent other things. And this is the next level of development. However, this is still not a fully developed capacity to imagine. Imagination as such, kind of in a broader sense of the world, develops in the next stage, which is pretend play, which really starts again around the age of 3 and then develops on and on and on, actually until adulthood. What is pretend play? Essentially, it's taking a role on yourself of a character or of an agent and then inventing a story, pretending being someone, pretending being in a situation. And initially, children are able to join the pretend play of others. So if we are, as teachers, come and say, and now let's pretend we're going to the moon. They can go with us to the moon, but so they will move with us through the story we create, but they will not create the story themselves. After that, the children are actually able to initiate their own games. And like young kind of children around the ages of 5, 6 onwards, they love playing soldiers or cowboys or Indians, like, all those kind of things. This is pretend play, and it develops on and on and on. And this pretend play facilitates our creativity, but not only that, it also allows us to play different social roles as we are adults, because I am pretend playing right now. I'm playing a lecturer who talks to people. I have other masks, I have other capacities, but this is the one I'm using. Now, another thing we need to keep in mind is that development does not follow one highway. There are different strands of development, and Anna Freud called those developmental lines. Just a few examples of developmental lines. One would be eating. So the first step is suckling. So an infant is sucking on his mother's breast. And the end of it is kind of rational eating. It's, sitting in a restaurant and kind of behaving at the table and eating properly. Some people never get there, by the way. The next one is a relational developmental line. So starting from from complete dependency on a parent to emotional self-reliance, so I can actually regulate my own emotion, then moving to a full kind of grown-up relationship with others. And the last one, which would link to play we were talking about before, is the development from body to toy. So as we think about, the sensomotor play is playing with your body. Then you move your game to the toy, then to an interpersonal activity, which is a pretend play, for example, because you can pretend play on your own, and that's what you start with, but then it's much more fun to pretend play with others. And then it moves to reading, learning, and essentially work. And this is all one developmental line. Why are we talking about developmental lines? Because it's very important to remember that a child who might be very developed in one aspect might be less developed in others. And what is important for us as teachers or parents or educators of any sort is to try and make sure that all the children we work with are more or less equally developed across all the lines. Obviously, children will have natural inclination and have more talent for something. But if a child is at the age of 4 is doing amazingly in maths but cannot communicate socially with his peers at all, we understand there is a problem, because there is no kind of the minimal level of development on each line for this age group is not achieved. And the word we need to kind of remember here is achieved. We see every progress our children are making as developmental achievements. And it might not look as something particularly impressive for us. Like, oh my God, the child is able to sit still for 3 minutes and actually listen to someone. It's like, great, you are sitting and listening to me now for much longer than that, and I won't be saying, well done, great for doing that. Even though I might. So, but for children, it's a massive developmental achievement. And we need to celebrate every developmental achievement we see in a child. It's right for older children as well, but it's especially crucial for working with preschoolers, because actually pretty much every single thing they do is a developmental achievement. And the last thing from those broad and general theories I wanted to talk about is mentalization. Kind of the long M word, which describes a imaginative mental activity, specifically perceiving and interpreting human behavior in terms of intentional mental states. So, very important that this activity is imaginative, because when I look at any one of you now, I don't know what's going on in your mind, but I'm pretty sure that you all have an active working mind. You're sitting here for a reason. You're sitting here and kind of have a different facial expression, a different posture for a reason, because your mind drives your actions. And I understand that none of your actions are random. They're all intentional, and they're all affected by whatever's happening in your mind, and also, but for example, by something that I'm doing. And the way I respond to you is also depending on what's going on in your mind. So it's a very sophisticated, multifaceted capacity to think about minds of people. And needless to say, it's a crucial skill for a teacher, and for a teacher of preschoolers, as well as any other teacher. You need to constantly have a hypothesis why every single person in your classroom behaving the way they do. Behaving well, misbehaving, not knowing how to behave, and we constantly develop these hypotheses and we constantly test them, because we can never be sure. And it's a very important aspect of mentalization. You can never know for sure that a child who is crying because you've done something, or because it might have nothing to do with the lesson or nothing to do with you, and we need to be able to do that. So a good teacher is mentalizing, and he knows age-specific characteristics. And these combined give us those core tools that we need in order to enter the classroom and be excellent. And now we're going to talk a bit more about those developmental characteristics, age-specific ones, which you all hopefully will be able to use.